In today's video, we have the latest updates on some potential trades involving Mark Scheifele and Elias Lindholm. Those two teams, and the Jets and the Flames, certainly looking to make some moves, and been a quiet summer, more than we expected. We have some updates as well on Trevor Zegras and his current contract stalemate with the Anaheim Ducks. We actually have a signing in Seattle, some updates as well on the PWHL, and other news from around the league. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about tonight. I do want to start things off with the news we learned earlier today. Unfortunately, the NHL alumni has lost another former NHL player, Brad Maxwell, the former number 7 overall pick back in 77. So certainly a string of sevens there. 7 and 77 has unfortunately passed away at the fairly young age of 66 years of age. He was drafted by Minnesota, of course, in that rendition of the Minnesota hockey team was the Minnesota North Stars. Went on to play for 5 other teams, including the Nordiques, and they ended up back in Minnesota to finish things out. So the defenseman had a decent 10-year career, and I just want to acknowledge his passing and certainly pass along any condolences to his friends or family. So certainly sad news there. We've had too much of that lately. There was a signing over this long Labor Day weekend as well that I didn't report on as of yet. I think it happened actually over maybe yesterday or Friday. Not really sure, but the Seattle Kraken did sign another player. Nothing too major. They signed a 27-year-old UFA defenseman, Mitch Reinke, who had played the last couple of years in a minor league American Hockey League team in a different organization. He gets a 1-year, 2-way contract. Gets a $140 salary at the AHL level, league minimum at the NHL level. So nothing too crazy there. Should be a big, busy week as well now that we're going to be through the Labor Day weekend here as of tomorrow in the new Women's League, the PWHL. We are a few days now into free agency. September 1st in the afternoon is when things kicked off. We don't have any signings announced as of yet. I know we're so used to the NHL and free agency and things being fast and furious within the, shortly after the clock strikes the time that it starts, right? But of course, this is kind of what you probably should expect when you don't get a lot of, rule breaking and tampering ahead of time. I mean, say what you want about the NHL, there has to be a lot of conversations going on ahead of time before they're technically supposed to have that many signings within such a short stretch of the opening of free agency. Clearly, with being a long weekend as well and everything, it's just been a little bit of a different go here in the PWHL. I thought we'd get a few big signings right away because there's certainly a few big names that are linked to certain cities based on where they've been based out of for a long time or other work that they do and things like that. Like Marie-Philippe Poulin, I suspect, will play in Montreal for that franchise. She's has a role with the Montreal Canadiens that she's doing part-time, and she has been based out of Quebec for most of her life. So obviously kind of makes sense, right? But again, we should have all kinds of signings and a busy week of news there as those 6 teams sign their first batch of players. And of course, the draft will be a little bit later in the month on September the 18th. We got an update as well from the 32 Thoughts podcast today. Elliot Friedman has a new pod out. Some more interviews from the European media tour, including Rasmus Sandin and a few others. Lindholm is in there, and Philip Zadina as well. And they did talk about some news, for example, on the Elias Lindholm front in Calgary. And we know that Craig Conroy, when he became GM, one of the big things he made as a real important piece was that he doesn't want to see Johnny Gaudreau 2.0 basically happen again. Like, they've lost a major franchise player with no return, and he didn't want that to happen again with all the top UFAs that they have coming up, going into this coming season. They didn't really address a lot of it so far. They traded Tyler Toffoli, but you still have Backlund, you still have Lindholm, you still have Tanev, you still have Zadorov, and we know that this is something that he made as a top priority, so I fully suspect him to kind of follow through on that. But as of right now, Friedman's reporting that things have been kind of quiet on the Lindholm contract extension front, but expects things to heat up and really pick up here as training camp opens and the season starts. But again, as we've said before, and I've said before, based on everything we've learned about the Lindholm situation, I do fully suspect that this really is more about money. Lindholm has made it clear, and Friedman reiterated that today in the podcast, that he is willing to stay, but they have to make the right offer to make him want to do that, I guess. He's certainly not, going to stay for a hometown discount by the sounds of things. I almost kind of get the feeling that they need to overpay a little bit to keep his services. Is kind of what it sounds like. Oh, of course, time will tell. We'll see what happens. But again, I suspect that depending on how things go for the Calgary Flames with all these pending UFAs, as much as they want to have a good season and as much as they'd like to be in the hunt for the playoffs, you don't want to risk. What if they did make the playoffs and had an early exit and had like 3 or 4 players walk via UFA? That would not be good from an asset management standpoint. So as much as you want to make the playoffs, you have to look at the future as well, especially if you're not considered a cup contender. There are some cases when keeping a player as your own rental makes sense. I don't know that some of these guys in Calgary are one of those scenarios, but we'll see. Things should definitely heat up around Lindholm as the season starts, especially if the Flames have like a slow start or something. I would think the trade talk around him is going to pick up even more. Another player that's in a contract, I wouldn't call it a dispute, but certainly in a bit of a holding pattern here is a young star, Trevor Zegras of the Anaheim Ducks. Elliotte Friedman did talk about him today. Zegras has also been getting some news on his own outside of the NHL because he's been linked and apparently dating a pretty big TikTok star out in California. But Zegras' contract with the Ducks, according to Elliotte Friedman, is most likely going to end with it being a bridge deal. I know Zegras probably, by the sounds of things, would have liked to have done a long-term deal. There was some interest, but I don't think they're able to come to terms right now on what it would need to be to make both sides happy. So at this point, you're likely looking at a 2-year deal. Well, he'll still be a restricted free agent and have arbitration rights at the end of the contract. I would suspect it's going to probably be somewhere near the Troy Terry $7 million amount, something along those lines. It could be a little bit less for it's a short term, but of course Zegras is a huge part of their future, and I know they'll get something done before too long here. But being a few weeks away from training camp, players like Zegras and a few of the other fairly higher profile RFAs that remain unsigned certainly going to have a lot of attention drawn to them here in the coming days as well. But Zegras likely looking at a bridge deal unless something drastic changes between Pat Verbeek and his representatives there. Alex Killorn, of course, we know signed with the Anaheim Ducks as well as a unrestricted free agent this offseason. He, of course, the longtime veteran, will be 34 here soon, and he made an appearance on a podcast called the Raw Knuckles Podcast with Chris Nyland recently, and talked about the fact that as much as he obviously spent a lot of time in Tampa, signed a new UFA contract with the Ducks, of course, on a 4-year deal, but he would really love to be able to go play for his childhood favorite team before he's all done, and that, of course, is the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, Alex Killorn was born in Halifax, but was raised mostly in the Montreal area, and grew up a Habs fan, big Habs fan. He said, on the podcast, he was all about the Habs as a kid. Remembers wearing Saku Koivu jersey, one of his favorite players, and certainly, would be a dream come true to eventually have a chance to play there. He said when free agency hit, Montreal never reached out to his camp to discuss a potential UFA contract, so never really came up from there. But he said at the end of this deal, before he's all done, and it sounds like he's obviously planning to play well into his late 30s or more, possibly, that he'd love to have a chance, even if it's a 1-year deal to finish out his career or something like that, to go back and play in Montreal. So certainly I don't think this is going to drum up or stir up any rumors of Killorn to Montreal. I mean, he literally just signed in Anaheim for 4 years. But at some point during that 4 years, even before he becomes a UFA, for example, if the Canadiens move along in their rebuild, in the next couple of years, and they're in a position where adding a veteran, maybe in his, third or fourth year, that deal is something that makes sense for them, maybe he'd be a player that they look to. You never know. Otherwise, like I said, it could be a 1-year free agency deal, but just interesting to hear an NHL player kind of express his desire to play in his hometown team before his career is over. Not really shocking that he'd want to do that by any means, but where he just signed as a UFA, it's just not something you typically hear a lot about discussed openly. There's another article as well I want to take a quick look at for looking at the Boston Bruins and Mark Scheifele. Of course, Scheifele is a player who's been again, like Lindholm, future very much undetermined and question marks around him, as well as his teammate Connor Hellebuyck in Winnipeg. There's another article in the Boston Hockey Now website kind of analyzing about the possibility of would Boston maybe make another run at Scheifele. There was some speculation over the early course of the offseason that they did have some conversations around this player and trying to see if a trade made sense, but it doesn't sound like they really got too far. I know a lot of people thought he would be a great fit there. Certainly losing Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci are huge blows to the Boston Bruins down the middle, and certainly going to be very tough and almost impossible in some cases, like Bergeron, to replace. Bergeron's a special talent, two-way guy. You can't just move a guy into his role and expect to get the same production, the same leadership, the same two-way play. That's just not going to happen. I know I've seen a lot of talk that with Scheifele known not to be the greatest defensively, not to be the hardest working back checker, etc., that Boston may not be a good fit for him. If you're comparing him to Bergeron, you're not going to get that same level of two-way play in the least. Could he become a potential fan target for being unsatisfied, in Boston? It's possible, but I don't really think the Bruins fans, regardless of how this team changes between this year and next year or beyond, that they really compare these guys to Krejci or Bergeron. They were phenomenal veterans who were there for a long time and had real solid careers, did special things. Like, you can't expect everybody to do that. Like this year, for example, you're going to have Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle, Morgan Geekie, for example. Geekie hasn't really accomplished a whole lot in his career as of yet. Is he going to be a player that the Bruins fans quickly turn on if he's not giving them, what they expect? If the expectations are too high, I would hope not. So, in the case of Mark Scheifele, he's a 40-goal guy, an 80, 90-point player at times. He can be a real offensive threat. Yes, he's not the defensive stalwart that Bergeron was, but could he help this team? He absolutely could. But the problem here is I don't think that the Bruins really have the assets that the Winnipeg Jets are going to be looking for in a trade. That's going to be the problem with Boston. I know a lot of people are wondering if they're going to take some steps back this year with the big holes down the middle. They still have pretty good depth on the wings. They still have a pretty decent defense core, have good goaltending. So it's hard to imagine Boston not being in the playoff mix. I know a lot of people are. I've seen a variety of predictions out there that some are saying they're going to be stepping back all the way to the point of missing. Some people say they're still going to make it, but they're going to be a little lower in the standings. I've seen a variety of opinions. It's just hard to imagine them going from such a historical record-breaking season to possibly being out of it. And I don't know that. The center position is super important, so it could, I guess, possibly happen. We'll have to wait and see. I haven't really finished my thorough analysis to make my predictions yet, but it's something that they're going to have to deal with. And I think over time, it's going to be a little while before they can really get their hands on some potential replacement players that are going to be able to produce at a higher level, because it's not easy. It's not cheap in free agency. Should they be able to do that next year? It's not cheap trade wise to pick up a player like this as well. So right now, Boston's spent so much time in win now mode and going for it that they don't really have a lot of assets in order to kind of make that happen. So we'll have to see where it goes. But could they make another pitch for Scheifele, especially if things don't get started the way they want? They certainly could. It wouldn't surprise me if they do it all. I just am not confident that they have the assets to get a deal done unless they offer something up that you wouldn't expect. Many people said before, it's going to take a player like Jake DeBrusk to even get the conversation off the ground. Doesn't mean it's going to be a one-for-one deal or anything like that. But, to make it move forward and have a chance, he's going to have to be on the table. So we'll have to see. And another quick note as well, out of Russia, Matvei Michkov for the second straight game was indeed a healthy scratch again by his KHL club. Certainly a lot of people now, after 2 consecutive games to start the season over there, Flyers fans especially, not happy, not good for his development, and are starting to really wonder if, because of the Ivan Fedotov situation, of course, the goaltender, obviously in a contract dispute between the KHL Flyers, the whole thing we've been covering here in the last couple of weeks, is that relationship between that and the KHL and the NHL and everything affecting how they're treating Michkov, since he really made it proclaimed that he wants to be a Flyer and he wants to play in the NHL, and all the comments he made around the time of the draft. Is this something that they're kind of doing intentionally just to kind of, because they can control it and they just don't care? What is it? Or do they really believe he can't play in the league yet as a regular everyday player? It makes you wonder, but things are starting to get worse and the tension is building, so we'll see if there's any more movement on that situation. I don't know if the Flyers can really do anything to get him over here any sooner, which is probably what their preferred plan would be, but I don't think that's going to happen. So let me know your thoughts on all today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.